Hello everyone, welcome to this new video for Star Wars Unlimited and a new tier list, and this time we're talking about the mono cunning cards, starting right away with Bodhi Rook. So Bodhi Rook is a pretty big staples of the double cunning archetype. So I've said before that double aspect cards need to be very powerful to be justified, because they basically restrict you from playing an entire color, which is a pretty big deal, especially when the card pool is so small. But I have to say that generally speaking, double cunning is very worth playing, especially in villainy. And Bodhi Rook is a big reason for this. He's a very strong 3 drops that comes to play, have an immediate impact, will basically do selective discard, and put a pretty decent body on the field, has 2 very relevant traits, and simply a very solid card and a strong reason to play double cunning. Generally speaking, double cunning Imperial, so double cunning with Boba Fett, is far stronger than double cunning with any other leader. And specifically in Boba Cunning, which is currently the only real competitive double aspect deck that we've seen so far in Star Wars Unlimited, Bodhi Rook is very good because being a 3-drop means that you can be played on turn 2, but it also means that during the Boba turn, you are capable of readying 1 resources with Boba's ability. So typically you would kill something using either a Bosk or a Cantina Bouncer. You will untap a resources with Boba's ability. You will then deploy Boba, attack with Boba, ready 2 more resources to end up with 3 resources. And with those 3 resources, you can play a 3-drop like Boba Fett or Bodhi Rook, which are so being a 3-drop is specifically good in that deck for that reason. The only thing that is holding this card back a little bit is obviously the fact that your opponent is not always going to have a non-unit card in hand. Units are by far the most common type of cards that people play, and and often, especially in the later stage of the game, you might not see any good event from the opponent to discard, which sometimes can be a little bit awkward. But outside of this, it's a very solid card, and a major staple of double cunning. And I don't think double cunning would be nearly as good if the Bodhi Rook was not part of it. So to me, it is going to be well justified to put it in A tier. I'm going to place this card basically under. So you see aggression. We rated aggression A tier and in double aspect. Double cunning card, generally speaking, are not as powerful as aggression, but because double cunning as an archetype is far stronger than double red, this card ends up just single outplay. So I'm going to play this basically over the Avenger here in the A tier category. Just a very solid card. Moving on to Cantina Bouncer. So just want to say that obviously because those cards are double cunning, double aspect, I judge them harsher than other cards. Obviously, if this card was single aspect, it would be an absolute S tier. But because it's double aspect, that obviously limits the potential of the card. Next, we get Cantina Bouncer. So Cantina Bouncer is another excellent double aspect card. Once again, as I said, double aspect, double cunning is simply just far better than the other double aspect in the game. And Cantina Bouncer is another good reason for it. It comes into play on turn 4, which is exactly the right moment for a Boba deck. Once again, you get to get up to your 5th resource. You can play Cantina Bouncer, get rid of anything, use Boba, untap resources, summon Boba, attack with Boba, you get 3 untapped resources, and so on. So it really works very well with Boba. And the good thing is, like, it can bounce something of any size as long as it's not the leader. So very flexible, and leaves behind a 3/5 body, which is very strong. This card is on the same power level, I would say, as Bosk, but Bosk, of course, is not double aspect, so a bit easier to play. And that means that Cantina Bouncer is going to be an excellent candidate once again to be an A-tier card. Just a card that I don't think double aspect would be a good aspect combination if this card did not exist. I'm gonna place this over 4th throw below Reinforcement Walker as a very solid A-tier card as well. Last but not least, we got the Cunning, the last double aspect card that I'm gonna be reviewing, and this card is basically in a vacuum. I think Aggression as a double aspect card is more powerful, but Cunning, because double Cunning is such a stronger archetype because of the 2 other Cunning cards and because of Boba and all the great yellow-black card we have in the game, then Cunning, of course, is kind of the icing on the cake, and is such. And among the double Cunning card, it is, in my opinion, the strongest of the 3. It is very flexible as it has 4 different modes. The modes that you're going to be using more often is the +4/+0 attack, which is just incredible. So you have to be careful when you do this, because you have to be careful to place it on a unit that you know is not going to be able to be dealt with. But the good news, like the other modes can allow you to they can allow you to mitigate the risk. You can bounce an enemy unit that normally would be able to kill the unit that you're boosting. So you have to be clever on how to use this card. You cannot just use this card blindly and hope it's going to work okay. But if you play this card properly, it's an amazing card. So I think if you play this card as just a big fog, like you tap 2 units and you bounce the 3rd one, that's not very good. You basically it's just what we call in trading card games like a fog effect. It's just gonna save you a turn, but it's not gonna benefit you so much. This card is really powerful as a tempo card where you're bouncing something and you give +4/+0 to something else, so you can put huge pressure on your opponent. So this is really where Cunning really start to become very powerful. So in my opinion, it is the card, even though, as I said, in a vacuum it's not necessarily the most powerful double aspect card, is the double aspect card that I'm going to rate the highest, because it simply is incredible in the context of the decks in which it exists. And once again, the environment really is favorable for this card. So where do I rate this? It's a bit complicated because it's very specialized for one specific deck. Of course, this deck would not exist if Cunning was not a thing. I'm gonna rate this card over. This is a tough call. I'm gonna rate this card over Dispatcher. Hard to rate this card over. It's a bit, once again, difficult to rate because maybe I'm gonna rate this over Traders. Okay, I'm gonna rate this under Open Fire. Open Fire is once again completely different card. It's a card that can be played in almost any deck, while Cunning is very specifically for one deck. But it is obviously in deck in which it exists, it is one of the best cards in the game in that specific deck. Moving on, we got Greedo. So also I think that I would rate Cunning S tier if double Cunning Boba was more powerful. But double Cunning Boba is considered to be, is by far the best double aspect deck, but it is not considered one of the best overall deck in the game. I would say a lot of people considered, me included, considered Green Boba, for example, to be more competitive, and ultimately this is what holding the card back as well. Is like, yeah, it's not the best. It's not featured in the best deck, and it definitely cannot be used in yeah. So moving on to Greedo. So Greedo is very simple, the best 1-drop in the game. If you're looking for a card that costs 1, Greedo is the best that you can get. It's basically a better version of the Death Star Stormtrooper, which we already rated high B tier earlier. And Greedo has a couple of inconveniences. He's not black, so it doesn't help you trigger the Vader ability, which is one of the main advantages of Death Star Stormtrooper. It also is not Imperial, but his ability to potentially deal 2 extra damage when he's getting killed is way worse the small sacrifice. And of course, the fact that it's mono yellow means it can be played in a wider variety of deck. Greedo is typically going to see play in almost every deck that plays Cunning, excepted maybe, so we've seen some Sabine decks playing less Greedo than they used to because it doesn't work really well with 4 cards I believe in. But even there's a strong argument that it should be featured in those decks. So Greedo is simply just an incredibly good card. Is it impactful enough on the meta to be worse S tier? I don't think so. I'm going to place this card high A tier. It's a great card, but I don't think it has the sort of impact on the meta that is worthy of being A tier. And the fact that it's not an auto-included hurts in certain decks also hurts the card a little bit. So I'm going to place this over Echo-based Defender, under A-Wing. I think it's a good place for Greedo. It's an excellent card. Moving from an excellent card to a terrible card, we have Jawa Scavenger. One of the worst card in the game, and probably the worst unit in the game, I would say. Simply horrible stats, even for 1-drop, and a keyword that is essentially useless most of the time. This keyword, basically Saboteur, is not very valuable on units that are very small. It's a card that I would not be happy to play even in draft. So I'm going to place this under Tactical Advantage, probably, yeah, at the bottom of D tier. Moving on, we got the Mining Guild TIE Fighter. So Mining Guild TIE Fighter is a very interesting card that I personally really like. It's cheap, it can be played, it's in space, so it's not so easy to kill, and every once in a while it will make you draw a card. I think a mistake that many people do when they play this card is like they use Mining TIE Fighter's ability too early, and they lose tempo as a result. But if you are in very late game situation and you need to draw a card, Mining Guild TIE Fighter is a very decent option, and it's also recursive. I think one is the good thing about Mining Guild TIE Fighter is it's featured in a color that is known for doing a lot of card disadvantage. Cunning is known for playing a lot of cards which makes you lose a card without gaining you any cards or without making your opponent lose any cards. And sometimes you're going to need some gas. And Mining Guild TIE Fighter does exactly this. It provides you board presence. It's very cheap, but provides you board presence. Will deal some damage to the opponent. Will be an extra body that you can sacrifice from Power of the Dark Side. Will be an extra body you can use Surprise Strike on to deal some damage. And in the later stage of the game, once you start to run out of gas, then you can spend some resources to draw some card. And this card, throughout the course of a game, can really draw you a lot of cards. So I think it's a pretty decent card. It's a decent option to have. Obviously, it's not an auto-include. Not every Cunning deck is going to run this, and it is a relatively specialized tool. But I think it's a pretty decent one. I think if you're looking for ways to draw card and you're playing a Cunning deck, Mining Guild TIE Fighter is one of the best options you can have. I'm going to place this card relatively high C tier, probably over Beam, over Babe, yeah, under Rock Squadron Skirmisher. For me, as a high C tier is a decent thing for it. Once again, I don't want to repeat this every time, but yeah, card advantage in this game is not really a big deal. Drawing card is not something that you really need most of the time. But I think this card is good enough, and it's kind of the exception that breaks the rule, right? In terms of card that is providing card draw and actually pretty decent. Then we got a card that is very simple and yet very powerful, the Crafty Smuggler, a 2/2 shielded for 2. This card is surprisingly powerful, especially in the current meta where a lot of people are playing 3/1s, a lot of people are playing 3/2s. This card is going to hold its ground pretty well, even against 3/3s. It will be able to trade against a 3/3 if you give them 2 rounds. Very annoying card to get rid of, and will provide you with ball presence, will provide you with a decent amount of damage. So we've already rated Bib on the C tier, which is a 1/3 shielded with an ability, but I have to say that the extra attack from Crafty Smuggler makes a massive difference. And Crafty Smuggler, in my opinion, is a far better card than Bib. So I'm very confident in my ability to rate this card in the B tier category, even though I've completely lost where I put it. This is the problem sometimes. Where did I put it? Well, this is unfortunate. I've lost my Crafty Smuggler. Okay, well, this is fine. We'll find it later. Anyway, moving on to our Outer Rim Headhunter. So, Outer Rim Headhunter doesn't look terrible on paper. It's basically a 2-3 for 2, but it is not really a 2-3 for 2. It's only on attack that it gets the +1 attack, so there are just simply better things you can do on turn 1. The attack when you control the leader is extremely situational, only works on non-leader while you control the leader. So extremely situational ability, relatively bad stats. There is simply better things to do for 2 resources in the current game. So not a horrible card, but there's just simply better things to do. So I'm gonna place this relatively high indeed here. It is not playable. Here you go, my Crafty Smuggler is here. So going back to Crafty Smuggler, where is he gonna go? I think I like Crafty Smuggler better than all those 2-3 for 2. I like it better than Death Star Stormtrooper. I like it better than Consortium Star Viper. Yeah, I'm gonna place it very high in beach here. I think it's an excellent card. Moving on, we got Pired Starfighter, a card that is very interesting, but requires very specific synergies to work. I think specifically it needs unit that cost 0 or unit that cost 1 and have a very powerful entering battlefield effect. Right now there's simply just not enough cards that work well with this card for this to be any good. The loss in tempo is just so big, and the benefit that you get from that is simply not good enough. So Pired Starfighter for me is absolutely unplayable, and he's going to go into the D tier, even lower than the Outer Rim, lower than this. Yeah, yeah, I really would rate this card very low. Yeah, it's simply just not a very good card at the moment. Next we got Swoop Racer. Yeah, I already said it before, but 3-4 for 3 is far better than 4-3 for 3, and even 3-4 for 3 vanilla without any ability would be very weak. No good trait, not a good stat line, and so yeah, this card is not good. There's just simply no reason to play this card in Constructed. I'm gonna rate this relatively low. Probably under this, yeah. Next we got Gamoran Guards. So Gamoran Guards, sorry, not sure if I pronounced it correctly, anyway, is a pretty decent card, surprisingly. It's a card that fits a very specific need for Cunning. Cunning doesn't have a lot of very good 4-drops. So if you're playing a double Cunning deck and you need a 4-drop, I think Gamoran Guards is honestly one of the best options out there. 4-4 Sentinels against aggro is actually pretty powerful. So it's a very niche card, but in the right situation in a double Cunning deck, as an anti-aggro tool, it's a card that you want to play in your main deck or in your sideboard because it's pretty decent against aggro, and there's no really anything else you can play in the 4-drop position. The 4-drop, especially in Cunning, is simply not very competitive. There's just not that many cards. I actually prefer this card over Jabba the Hutt at the moment. So I'm gonna rate this. Yeah, I'm gonna rate this under this. So I don't know why this Vanguard Ace is going up there. He's definitely gonna go all the way down here. But yeah, Gamoran Guard next to Heroic Sacrifice makes sense. Next we got another 4-dropped Straing Gunship. I was very high on this card when it first appeared, and then as I played it, I started to become less and less impressed by it. I think it has the disadvantages of being very slow. You play it, and then it takes a very long time you have to wait an entire turn for it to have an impact, as opposed to Gamoran Guard, which gives you something immediate, being a Sentinel. And once you play him, the situation in which the gunship is going to be good if your opponent plays a lot of very small units that you can pick off with gunship without taking any damage back. So it's a decent card, and there's going to be a lot of situations where it's good, but there's going to be some situations where it's not good, and more importantly, it's going to be relatively slow. You can play it with Energy Conversion Lab, of course, to give it an immediate impact, but I think that it's not the best ECL target. There are far better ECL target out there. So I think it's a playable card, but I'm not very high on the card, and personally, I prefer Gamoran Guards most of the time. I actually prefer Gamoran Guards most of the time. So we're gonna rate this in the same ballpark. Those cards, honestly, if you play Gunship instead of the guards, I'm not gonna be mad. Like I think those cards are fairly similar in terms of power level, but I just have had a relatively bad experience with the Gunship in general, and I just prefer to have a straight up 4/4 Sentinels for 4 rather than a 3/4 with some fancy abilities. Moving on with Syndicate Laes. This card is actually pretty decent, and I think it's just missing the mark for constructed play just by a little bit. I think that the main obstacle for Syndicate Laes is that there's simply better things to do for 5 resources in this game, almost regardless of the color combination that you're playing. If you're playing double Cunning, you're gonna prefer your Bosk and your forgot the name and the Cantina Bouncer. If you're playing green, you're gonna prefer your Traders, your Agent Laes, and your Bosk again. Like there's just simply just so many other card that you would rather play. There's also, of course, the Steadfast Battalion, which has been very successful. Like there's simply so many strong 5-drops in the game, and I think there's a way Syndicate Laes could see a lot more play, but that's currently not the meta we are in right now. I can totally see this card becoming more popular if the 5 attack really start to matter a lot. I don't think this card is unplayable by any means, but I think there's just mostly better things to do. I'm still going to put this at the bottom of C tier, but I think it's definitely not as good as it seems at first. I'm going to place this next to Bail Organa. I think it's a good card in the vacuum, but it just happens to be competing with a lot of other things. Smuggling Compartment, a very deceivingly bad card. I thought this card was pretty good when it first came out. Very low resources and investment. The +1/+1 definitely matters, and the ability is very strong. Being able to ready your resources most of the time is very good. But there's 2 things that are holding this card back. The first thing is that it can only attach to vehicle. Right now, I'll say it right now, but whenever there's an upgrade that says that can only be equipped to vehicle, it's a very big red flag, because it's going to be upgrades are already fairly situational by themselves. The fact that they can only be equipped to a vehicle makes them even worse. Very similarly to what you see with heavy blasters, for example. The other problem with this card is that usually you want to ready your resources after you played something, and most of the time the train of action is you attack with things first, because that's what your opponent can interact with most likely. So you want to make sure you attack with your units, you get your damage and you get your value, and then once you've attacked with everything, you start playing your cards from your hand, because it's going to be harder for your opponent to interact with that. This is the obviously there's cases where that's not the case, but most of the time this is what you're going to do. So this means that the Smuggling Compartment, you're going to attack with your unit first, and you're going to benefit from the ability, but you have nothing to ready because you haven't played anything yet. So in order to make use of that card, you need to play something first and then attack with a unit, and obviously in that time that gives the opponent a timing window to interact with your guy with the Smuggling Compartment. So the ability is not as easy to use as it seems, and the fact that it's attached to a vehicle very restrictive. So overall this card is not good. It has a sweet. It combines well with the Falcon, because with the Falcon you have a resource tap at the beginning of the turn, but even then it's just simply not very good. Yeah, so it's gonna be D tier. I'm gonna place this relatively low. Unfortunately, another card that has most people thought it was very powerful, and then Snaptop Reflexes, another 1 resources upgrade, which I think is a lot better because it can be equipped on anything. The fact that it has allowed you to attack with a unit right away after attach is basically just a +1/+1 buff. I think that this card is pretty decent, especially in aggressive decks. But of course now with and it actually used to see play in some aggressive deck, but simply we've seen the aggressive deck, of course, wanting to play for a cause I believe in order to gain to have the ultimate finishing move. And this card is not heroic, which means that it needs to be very powerful to justify its slots into the deck. Unfortunately, Snaptop Reflexes doesn't have the impact that a card like Surprise Strike has, or even a card like Shoot First. So it simply just hasn't seen any play, unfortunately, because of how powerful the heroic unit are needed and how important they are for a cause I believe in. So ended up, unfortunately, used to be great, not really that great anymore. I still think it's playable, so I'm going to place this at the bottom of D tier. I still think it's playable, but it really has fallen off the grace. It used to be really a card that you would see in aggro deck, but now you really need those high impact cards, or to be an heroic card. If it was heroic, it would see a lot more play, but yeah. Moving on, we got Disarm. Okay, Disarm is not a bad card. It's basically Jedha's ability, Jedha's City base ability, but on a card, but can be applied to any unit, not only leaders. It's cheap and it can be quite useful in some situation. But the problem is it's very redundant with a lot of things that Cunning is doing. Cunning has a lot of cards like these that are very cheap, that allows you to disable a unit for one turn, either by exhausting him, by bouncing it. So this card is very redundant with a lot of things that Cunning is already doing. And in the categories of all those cards that can disable a unit for one turn, Disarm is not does not compare favorably to those cards most of the time. Another point of redundancy with this card is the fact that its Jedha City has the same effect, but for free, which is another problem. So overall, I don't think Disarm. Yeah, I don't think it's a good idea to put Disarm in your deck. It's very redundant with a lot of things. So I'm gonna put it in D tier. I know some people probably would rate this card C tier, but I simply haven't been convinced by this card. I've never seen this card having any success. It's probably, once again, there's probably some situation where it's good, but it's a fairly situational card. And I think that there's just so many other Cunning cards that do similar things but better. So I'm gonna place it relatively high in D tier, maybe over the Militia. Next, we got a card which has been a staple of Cunning for a very long time, and that's Shoot First. So Shoot First is an excellent card that allows you to attack something and kill that thing without using your own unit. So it's basically a removal that uses a removal. It's a little bit similar to cards like Strike True, but it's just a much better version of Strike True in my opinion, as it's very cheap, gives an attack bonus as well. And it's just a very, very solid card, very good with Boba because you can use it, kill a unit, and then untap the resources right away. So the fact that it's good in Boba also helps the card tremendously. It's an excellent card, especially against aggro, as it gives you some cheap way to get rid of units on the board without losing your own units. Just a very, very solid card. There is some situation where it's bad. It can also be used to deliver the killing blow, and gives you this extra damage that's going to be needed for you to win. This is going to be... is it good enough to be in A tier? I believe so. I believe we can consider Shoot First as a staple in this game, and I would rate this above Interceptor, maybe below Rebel Assault, even though, of course, there's an argument for this. But yeah, this card is simply just very solid. Next, we got Asteroid Sanctuary, another card that used to be a staple in Cunning, but has fallen off since then because there has been better exhaust effect being introduced later on, like Not Good to Me Dead, for example. Asteroid Sanctuary is a very decent card, and it is totally playable. Once again, as I said, there just has been some better options out there. Giving a shield to something, the problem with this card is sometimes a little bit situational because you need a unit that you want to give a shield on. Otherwise, the card is just simply a tap effect. I think it's better than Bamboozle. Bamboozle is a bit more specialized. It's a tough call. It still plays in double Cunning. I'm gonna rate this card over Mining, but below the Skirmisher here. I think that's a decent place for it. Next, we got Sneak Attack. So when Sneak Attack got shown everybody was kind of like, including me by the way, this card is going to be amazing, be able to play. So I always say that trading card advantage for tempo is not a good idea. You do not. Tempo is more important than card advantage, while sneak attack is the exact opposite. It does card disadvantage, but gives you a lot of tempo. So for that, on that basis, I thought this card was going to be very powerful. It has a lot of good combos in the game, but after playing it, I've been very disappointed by this card. I really thought that this card was going to be amazing. This card is still relatively recent compared to the other card on this list, so maybe there's going to be there still hasn't been anybody who has managed to crack the code for that card. But the problem with this card is simply because it requires two cards to play. You need the card that plays well with sneak attack, and the card, and you need the sneak attack itself. You need, and even if you manage to set together that combo, the unit that you end up playing with sneak attack will die at the end of the turn, and it's a huge downside. Honestly, it's a very, very big downside, even for an aggressive deck. So the card is very clunky to use in an aggressive deck, and in a control deck, the downside of having to sacrifice your unit is simply too big. There's a lot of cards that combines very well with this card, mostly I would say K2SO is a great card for it. There's a couple of things that it does very well, but overall it is a relatively specialized card. You really need to build your deck around this card for this card to be good. And right now, I haven't seen anybody being successfully managed to successfully do so. So, is this unplayable? I don't think it's unplayable. I'm gonna give this card the benefit of the doubt, and I'm gonna put it at the bottom of C tier. Just once again to kind of like back myself up, because I think there's a way this card could be very broken in some very specific situation. But and I don't think it's unplayable, but maybe it's going to need a bit more help. It's going to need a few more sets to become a good card. Because right now there's simply just not enough synergies with it in the current set for this to work consistently. It's an extremely clunky card at the moment. Next we got the classic Surprise Strike. Surprise Strike is the best boost spell in the game. There's simply no other card in the game that can give you +3/+0 and an attack on the same action, and it's also relatively cheap. And because it's mono Cunning, can be used in any Cunning deck. And I'm gonna have a hot take here. Surprise Strike, in my opinion, is an auto include in every Cunning deck. Even if you're playing a control deck, Surprise Strike is worth playing, because even in a control deck, in a control Cunning deck, which there are a few of, even though they're not very popular, you can use this card to use a small body and kill something that is far larger than what it is. So it's used to allow small bodies to kill much bigger bodies, and obviously it's an amazing finisher. It's gonna so many games of Star Wars Unlimited have been finished by a good old Surprise Strike. Surprise Strike allows you to win games that you should not be able to win otherwise. It's an incredible card. And for that reason, this is going to be a S tier card. It really is one of the best cards in the game, and it is an absolute auto-include in every Cunning deck. So I'm going to place this card very high. So over Darth Vader for sure. I think I'm going to rate this over Boba Fett, but under Fire Spray. It's just that good. It's an incredible card. And yeah, every time I resource a Surprise Strike, I'm like, damn, that I wish I didn't have to do this. Whenever you talk about people who play Sabine Yellow, all of them plays 47 heroic card. And guess which card is not heroic in this deck? Surprise Strike, all the time. Surprise Strike, even the incorporation of Thorrk, I believe in, he had almost zero impact on how often people play Surprise Strike. People still would totally play Surprise Strike, even though it doesn't combine well with Thorrk, I believe in. This is because this card is that good. Moving on, we got Outmaneuver. So Outmaneuver is an interesting card. Basically, in a vacuum, it's a card that is basically a very overpriced exhaust effect. Yes, it can exhaust multiple units at once, but how often does that actually matter? Sometimes, in my opinion, most of the time, it's the most important thing to do is to exhaust the most powerful unit the opponent has, and then if you can exhaust a few other units, that's fine. But it's a symmetrical effect that also exhausts your own unit, and it's very expensive once again. For something that only exhausts, it's a very expensive effect. So in a vacuum, I think Outmaneuver is a terrible card. With that being said, there is a certain strategy that really likes this card. There's two kinds of strategy that really likes this card. First of all, if you're playing a control deck that does not play any units, or play very, very few units, Outmaneuver can be kind of a good fog effect that can just tap down multiple units and buy you some time until you can get to Super Laser Blast or stuff like this. And I don't necessarily, I still think it's better to just kill a unit permanently using an open fire or Power of the Dark Side rather than temporarily exhausting a couple of units. But it is something that sometimes can be used. Another context in which this card is actually pretty good is obviously if you're playing a deck that is only focused on space. There's people who build those decks where they almost only play space units. They attack into space and then they play Outmaneuver to kind of win the race and exhaust everything on the ground. And in this context, this card is very, very strong. It's actually one of the best cards in the deck in that context. With that being said, this deck is not very good right now. Simply playing a deck solely based on a space unit is not a good idea, simply because the card pool is not big enough, and you're going to be forced to play a lot of very bad cards in order to make that happen. So currently, I think Outmaneuver is D tier, but once again, it's a card that has a lot of potential in the future. It's a card that I can totally see becoming a thing in the future. So I'm going to place it D tier. I don't think it's good right now. I don't think any deck should be playing this, or if your deck is built around that card, then your deck is not going to be very good. But it has loads of potential in the future. Next, we got a classic Cunning card, a Waylay, which allows you to return a non-leader unit to the on the hand, so what we call in turning card games turn a bounce effect. A Waylay just is a very solid card. It is one of the most powerful card in the game because it allows you to deal with something of any size for a relatively cheap price. You could argue, yes, bringing something back into your opponent's hand is not the same thing as killing something for forever, but I have to say that Waylay has been, in this game, the fact that you're drawing 2 cards per turn, bouncing something back into his hand in a lot of cases is just as good as killing it, honestly. So it's just a very, very, very strong card that, in my opinion, is going to be played in most decks, in most aggressive and mid-range and even control decks. It's a very solid card. I don't think it is an auto-include. We've seen notably aggro deck going away from Waylay because, once again, it doesn't work with 4 cards I believe in. And people usually prefer to ignore the enemy units than or disable them with they usually prefer to ignore the opponent rather than just bouncing things. So it's more of a tempo card than an aggro card. And if your opponent plays a big Sentinel unit, people would probably prefer to play Spectral Soldiers most of the time. With that being said, it still is an incredible card, and I'm going to rate this relatively high A tier. I'm going to rate this over No Good to Me Dead, relatively high A tier here. So it's just a very, very good card. Next, we got a card called Don't Get Cocky, which is one of the very rare real removal that Cunning has access to. Unfortunately, it's a very bad one. I'm not going to explain in detail on how it works, but basically, it's a card that does not guarantee you to deal any damage. It's a very kind of push your luck thing. It's a very luck-based card, and normally those cards are not really good in competitive. I don't think this is a card which was meant to be played in competitive. It's a card that is meant for people who want to play kind of more fun, wonky deck, and it's completely fine. I don't think this card is meant for competitive. It's extremely unreliable, it is relatively expensive, and yes, it can potentially deal 7 damage, which is great, but most of the time it won't. And that's why I don't think it's a very good card, just too unreliable. So I'm going to place this in D tier for constructed play, but I'm sure it's a very fun card to play with in other contexts. So I'm going to place this I'm gonna place this here. Next, we got Change of Heart. Change of Heart is an interesting card, taking control of a unit just for one turn. Very expensive, but it's a card that can win you the game in some situations. So, in my opinion, Change of Heart has been mostly a very metagame based card. It's a card that's very strong in certain metagames and in certain situations, and this is why mostly people play it in the sideboard and not in the main deck. And for all those reasons, but it is a very effective card. It is a very top curve in a relatively aggro deck in double Cunning. It's a very good top curve card that's going to be very strong against control decks that simply play very large units. It's a card that makes you take initiative extremely aggressively. It's a card that you're going to have to play around if you're playing against a double Cunning deck or simply just Cunning decks in general. As a finisher, I think it is not as reliable. Aggro decks typically have been going away from this card because, once again, it doesn't work with 4 cards I believe in. And 4 cards I believe in, Surprise Strike, Millennium Falcon, have typically been more reliable finishers. Change of Heart is a lot more unreliable. It really depends a lot on what the opponent is playing. With all that being said, I think it's a solid card, and I would be happy to rate this card in B tier. I think it's seen enough play and being powerful enough to be worthy of that slot. We're gonna place this over Yularen, Spark of Rebellion. Yeah, I'm gonna place this under Soul Guerrera. It's a card that has shown enough to be worthy of the spot, of the B tier spot for sure. And that's it for this video. We are done with all the regular colors, so we just have to go now for the monocolor cards, the villainy, heroism, and neutral cards. Thank you so much for following the channel so far, and if you got any question, feel free to ask them, and see you around.